The chainsaw died mid-cut, which should not have happened because I had just refueled it 20 minutes earlier. I stood there in the silence of the Oregon forest, my breath creating small clouds in the cold October air, and stared at the half-severed Douglas fir before me. The tree was bleeding sap, thick and dark, but that was normal. What was not normal was the smell that suddenly filled my nostrils, something like rotting meat mixed with wet soil, and the fact that every single bird in the surrounding forest had stopped singing at the exact same moment. I looked around at the towering trees, their shadows stretching long in the afternoon light, and felt the first cold finger of dread trace down my spine. Something was watching me. I could feel it the way you feel, eyes on your back in a crowded room, except this room was empty, and I was completely alone. Or at least, I thought I was. My name is Logan, and I am 27 years old. I have been working as a wood logger in the Pacific Northwest for the past 5 years, ever since I graduated from a technical college in Portland with a forestry degree. The work is hard, the pay is decent, and the solitude suits me just fine. Or at least it did, until 3 weeks ago when I took a contract job for a private timber company called Redwood Acquisitions. They offered me double my usual rate to work a remote section of forest near the town of Whisper Falls, Oregon, about 60 miles from the nearest highway. The money was too good to refuse, and I needed it. My younger sister was dealing with medical bills, and I had promised to help her out. So I packed my gear, loaded up my truck, and drove into the mountains without a second thought. I wish I had thought twice. I wish I had asked more questions. But hindsight is a luxury you only get after you survive. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like something was watching you in the woods? Have you ever experienced something you could not explain while you were alone in nature? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences help me know I am not losing my mind. And if you are new here, welcome. You are about to hear something that will make you think twice before going on that camping trip you have been planning. The first week at the Whisper Falls site was completely normal. I set up my base camp in a small clearing about half a mile from the logging zone. The company had provided a reinforced trailer with a generator, a small kitchenette, and a surprisingly comfortable bed. Every morning, I would wake up at 5 a.m., eat a quick breakfast, and hike to the designated cutting area with my chainsaw, safety gear, and a thermos of coffee. The forest was beautiful in that untouched way that makes you feel small and insignificant. Trees that were easily 200 years old stretched toward the sky, their trunks so wide that 3 men could not wrap their arms around them. The air smelled like pine and earth, and the only sounds were the wind moving through the branches and the occasional call of a crow or hawk. I was supposed to selectively harvest specific marked trees, the ones with orange spray paint indicating they were approved for cutting. The company had been very clear about this. Only cut the marked trees. Do not wander off the established paths. Complete your daily quota and return to camp before dark. Simple enough instructions for simple work. I followed them to the letter during that first week, cutting down 6 to 8 trees per day, processing the logs, and marking them for the pickup crew that would come every Friday to haul the timber out. It was honest work, and I was good at it. But on the 8th day, things started to change. I had just finished felling a large hemlock when I noticed something odd. About 30 feet to my left, there was a tree that had not been there the day before. I know that sounds impossible. Trees do not just appear overnight, but I had been working this same area for a week, and I knew every tree, every rock, every fallen log. This tree was different. It was a twisted, gnarled thing with bark that looked almost black, and it was growing at an unnatural angle, like it was leaning away from something. What caught my attention even more was that it had orange spray paint on it, the marking that indicated it should be cut. But I had not marked this tree. The company surveyors had done all the marking before I even arrived, and they had finished their work 2 weeks prior. I walked closer to examine it, and that was when I noticed the smell. That same rotting meat and wet soil odor that I mentioned earlier. It was coming from the tree itself, seeping out of cracks in the bark like the tree was diseased. I have worked with sick trees before, trees infested with beetles or fungus, but this was different. This smelled like death. I pulled out my radio to call the site supervisor, a gruff man named Bill, who worked out of a regional office 50 miles away. The radio crackled with static, which was unusual because I typically had clear reception at this location. "Bill, this is Logan. Do you copy?" I said into the radio. Static. "Bill, I have a question about one of the marked trees. Can you hear me?" More static. And then, faintly, a voice. But it was not Bill's voice. It was higher, almost childlike, and it said something that made my blood run cold. "Cut it down, Logan. Cut it down before dark." The radio went dead. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart starting to pound in my chest. There was no way that was Bill. And how did whoever that was know my name? I looked back at the twisted tree, and I noticed something I had missed before. There were scratch marks on the bark, deep gouges that looked like they had been made by something with very large claws. The gouges were fresh, the exposed wood underneath still white and weeping sap. I decided not to cut the tree that day. Call it instinct, call it fear, but something told me to leave it alone. I gathered my gear and started hiking back to camp, moving faster than usual. The forest seemed darker somehow, even though it was only 3 p.m. and I should have had hours of daylight left. The shadows between the trees looked deeper, more substantial, like they had weight and presence. I kept glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that something was following me. But every time I looked, there was nothing there. Just trees and shadows, and the fading afternoon light. I made it back to camp without incident and spent the evening trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid. I heated up a can of chili, ate it while listening to an old podcast on my phone, and went to bed early. But sleep did not come easy. I kept thinking about that tree, about the voice on the radio, about the scratch marks. Around 11 p.m., I finally drifted off into an uneasy sleep. I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of something scratching at the trailer door. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like fingernails dragging across metal. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I lay in bed, frozen, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The scratching continued for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. Then it stopped. I waited in the darkness, barely breathing, listening for any other sound. There was nothing, just silence. After another 20 minutes, I worked up the courage to grab the flashlight I kept next to my bed and creep to the window. I pulled back the curtain just enough to peer outside. The clearing was empty. The moon was full and bright, casting everything in silver light. I could see the tree line clearly, and there was nothing there. No animal, no person, nothing. I checked the door and found 3 deep scratches in the metal, parallel gouges that looked exactly like the ones I had seen on the twisted tree. Whatever had made those marks had been strong enough to scar reinforced steel. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in a chair with my back to the wall, holding a hunting knife in one hand and my flashlight in the other, waiting for sunrise. When dawn finally came, I was exhausted but relieved. Daylight made everything seem less threatening. I told myself it had probably been a bear, maybe a mountain lion. Animals sometimes approached campsites looking for food. The scratches were concerning, but not impossible to explain. I decided to report it to Bill when I got reception, but otherwise, I would continue working. I needed this job. I needed the money. But if you are enjoying this story so far, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps the channel grow and lets me know you want to hear more stories like this. And if you are not subscribed yet, subscribe now, because things are about to get much worse. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. I returned to the logging site that morning with a sense of dread I could not shake. The twisted tree was still there, still marked with orange paint, still smelling like death. I decided to cut it down. Maybe it was a mistake to leave it standing. Maybe removing it would remove whatever was wrong with this place. I fired up my chainsaw, said a quick prayer under my breath, and approached the tree. The moment the chainsaw blade bit into the bark, I knew something was terribly wrong. The tree screamed. I am not being poetic or metaphorical. The tree let out a high-pitched shriek that sounded almost human, and black sap exploded from the cut, spraying across my pants and boots. I jerked back, nearly dropping the chainsaw, and stared in horror as the tree began to writhe. The trunk twisted and contorted, the branches thrashing like limbs, and that rotting smell became overwhelming. so strong I gagged and nearly vomited. I stumbled backward, and the chainsaw died in my hands, the engine coughing once before going silent. The tree stopped moving. The shrieking stopped. Everything went quiet again, that same oppressive silence from the day before. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming from somewhere in the forest behind me. I turned slowly, my hands shaking, and saw something that made my mind struggle to process what I was seeing. There was a man standing about 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a massive cedar tree. At least, I thought it was a man. It was roughly man-shaped, tall and broad-shouldered, but something about its proportions was wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees, and its head seemed too large for its body. It was not moving, just standing there, watching me. I could not see its face clearly because of the shadows, but I could feel its attention on me, focused and intense. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Do you need help?" The figure did not respond. It did not move. It just stood there, silent and still, like a statue. I took a step forward, and instantly, the figure took a step back, mirroring my movement perfectly. I stopped. It stopped. My heart was racing now, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was just another logger, someone who had gotten lost or disoriented. Maybe I was seeing things wrong because of the stress and lack of sleep. "I am a contract logger for Redwood Acquisitions," I said, trying to sound confident and professional. "This is a restricted work site. You need to leave." The figure tilted its head to one side, a slow, jerky movement that looked unnatural. And then, it smiled. I could see its teeth even from that distance. Too many teeth, too sharp, gleaming white in the shadows. It raised one of those two long arms and pointed at me, and I swear I heard it whisper something even though it was 50 yards away. It sounded like my name, Logan. I ran. I did not think, did not plan, just turned and ran as fast as I could back toward the camp. I could hear those heavy footsteps behind me, crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. I did not look back. I just focused on moving, on putting distance between myself and whatever that thing was. The forest seemed to fight me every step of the way, branches grabbing at my clothes, roots trying to trip me, the ground uneven and treacherous. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I kept running. I burst into the camp clearing and threw myself into the trailer, slamming the door behind me and locking it. I stood there, gasping for breath, waiting for the sound of something hitting the door or scratching at it. But there was nothing, just silence again. I peered out the window and saw the tree line, empty and still. Whatever had been chasing me had not followed me into the clearing. Or maybe it had never been chasing me at all. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing, but I knew I had not imagined it. I knew what I had seen, and I knew that I needed to get out of this forest as soon as possible. I grabbed my radio and tried to call Bill again, tried to tell him that I was leaving, that something was wrong with this site, that he needed to send someone to investigate, but all I got was static. I tried my cell phone, but there was no signal. I was cut off, completely isolated. The nearest road was a 5-mile hike through the forest, and I would have to go on foot because my truck was parked at a staging area even further away. I spent the rest of that day barricaded in the trailer, trying to come up with a plan. I could not stay here, that much was clear, but leaving meant hiking through the forest, and after what I had seen, the thought of being out there in the trees made my skin crawl. I decided to wait until morning. I would pack my essential gear, leave everything else, and make a run for it at first light. It was a 6-hour hike to the staging area where my truck was parked, maybe 8 if I was being cautious. I could make it. I had to make it. That night was the longest night of my life. I sat in the trailer with every light on, my knife in one hand and a heavy wrench in the other, listening to every sound outside. Around 10 p.m., the scratching started again, but this time it was not just at the door. It was all around the trailer, on the walls, on the roof, like there were multiple things circling the structure. I could hear them moving, hear their footsteps crunching in the gravel, hear what sounded like whispering or chanting in a language I did not recognize. At midnight, something hit the side of the trailer so hard that the whole structure shook. I yelped and jumped up, backing into a corner, my eyes darting to every window and door. The impact came again and again, a steady rhythmic pounding like a battering ram. The metal walls groaned and buckled, and I realized with growing horror that whatever was out there was trying to get in. I screamed at it to go away, shouted every curse word I knew, but the pounding continued. And then, at exactly 1 a.m., it stopped. Everything went quiet. No scratching, no pounding, no footsteps, just silence. I stood there for another hour, trembling, waiting for it to start again. But it did not. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and I collapsed into the chair, falling into a fitful sleep filled with nightmares of twisted trees and grinning figures with too many teeth. I woke up at dawn to find the trailer door standing wide open. I know I had locked it. I know I had checked it multiple times throughout the night. But it was open now, the morning light streaming in, and there was something lying on the floor just inside the threshold. It was a pile of bones, animal bones by the look of them, arranged in a strange circular pattern. In the center of the circle was a piece of paper, old and yellowed, with words written on it in faded ink. I picked up the paper with shaking hands and read the message. It was a list, written in cramped, hurried handwriting that looked like it was from another era. The heading at the top said, "Rules for Survival." My blood ran cold as I read through them. Wait, I need to correct something. I was told specifically not to include rules in the story. Let me revise this section. I picked up the paper with shaking hands and read the message. It was a warning, written in cramped, hurried handwriting that looked like it was from another era. The words were simple but chilling. They only come at night. Stay in the light. Do not speak to them. Do not acknowledge them. If you see the tree man, run. He marks his prey. The paper was unsigned, but at the bottom, there was a date. October 1987. That was nearly 40 years ago. Someone else had been here, had experienced what I was experiencing, and had left this warning. But for whom? And why had no one told me about this before I took the job? I thought about Bill, about Redwood Acquisitions, about how eager they had been to hire me for this site. Double the usual rate, remote location, no questions asked. They had known. They had to have known. I crumpled the paper in my fist, anger cutting through my fear. I had been set up. Whatever was in this forest, the company knew about it, and they had sent me in anyway. I did not know why, did not know what they hoped to accomplish, but I knew I could not trust them. I was on my own. I stuffed the paper in my pocket, grabbed my backpack, and started loading it with supplies. Water bottles, energy bars, a first aid kit, my knife, a compass, and a map of the area. I also grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit. It would not do much against whatever was out there, but it was better than nothing. As I was packing, I noticed something else. The scratch marks on the trailer door were not random. They formed a pattern. 3 sets of parallel lines arranged in a specific way. It looked almost like a symbol or a marking, something deliberate and purposeful. I had seen similar markings before, back when I was in college studying forestry. They were boundary markers, used by old logging camps to designate territory or warn of danger. But these marks were different, cruder, more primitive. They looked ancient. I finished packing and stepped out of the trailer into the morning light. The forest looked deceptively peaceful, the sun filtering through the trees, birds singing their morning songs. But I knew better now. I knew what waited in the shadows. I oriented myself using the compass and started walking toward the staging area where my truck was parked. The hike should have taken 6 to 8 hours at a steady pace, but I was planning to move as fast as possible. I wanted to be out of these woods before nightfall. The first 2 hours were uneventful. I followed the old logging road, keeping to the center of the path, away from the tree line. I did not see or hear anything unusual, and I started to hope that maybe whatever was haunting this place only came out at night. Maybe I could make it out before they noticed I was gone. But that hope was shattered when I came across the first body. It was lying in the middle of the road, partially hidden by tall grass. At first, I thought it was a deer or an elk, but as I got closer, I realized it was human, or had been human. The body was so badly decomposed and torn apart that it was hard to identify much about it. but I could see remnants of clothing, a faded flannel shirt, and work boots. A logger, someone like me who had worked this site. I knelt down, my stomach churning, and noticed something clutched in the corpse's skeletal hand. It was a radio, identical to mine. I pried it loose and checked it, but it was dead, the battery corroded. I said a silent prayer for whoever this person had been and kept moving. But I found 2 more bodies in the next mile, both in similar condition, both clearly loggers based on their gear. How many people had Redwood Acquisitions sent to this site? How many had they sacrificed or left to die? The anger I felt earlier returned, hotter and sharper. If I made it out of here, I was going to make sure people knew what this company had done. I was going to make sure they paid for it. Around noon, I stopped to rest and eat. I found a small clearing off the road that had a large boulder I could sit on, giving me a good view of the surrounding area. I ate an energy bar and drank some water, trying to conserve my supplies. As I sat there, I noticed something odd. There were no insects. The forest was full of birds and the occasional rustle of small animals, but there were no flies, no mosquitoes, no bees, nothing. In a healthy forest ecosystem, insects should be everywhere, especially in October when they are still active before the winter freeze. The absence of insects was not natural. It was like the forest itself was sick, corrupted by whatever presence lurked here. I finished my meal and was about to continue when I heard singing. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind, but it grew louder. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing what sounded like a lullaby. The song was beautiful and haunting, and it was coming from somewhere to my right, off the road and deeper into the forest. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me not to investigate, to keep moving. But something about that voice pulled at me. It sounded sad and lonely, like whoever was singing needed help. I stood up and took a few steps toward the sound. The singing continued, unchanging in volume despite my movement. I pushed through some underbrush and found myself in a small grove of birch trees. In the center of the grove was a woman in a white dress, her back to me, her long dark hair cascading down to her waist. She was swaying gently as she sang, her arms outstretched like she was dancing. "Hello?" I called out. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The singing stopped. The woman stopped swaying. For a long moment, she stood perfectly still, and I had the sudden, overwhelming sense that I had made a terrible mistake. Then, slowly, she began to turn around. I saw her face, and I stumbled backward, a scream catching in my throat. It was not a woman. It was not human. The face was a mockery of human features, the skin gray and stretched too tight, the eyes empty black pits, the mouth too wide and filled with needle-like teeth. It smiled at me, that same terrible smile I had seen on the tree man, and took a step forward. "Logan," it said in that beautiful singing voice. "Why did you run?" "We only want to play." I did not wait to hear more. I turned and ran back toward the road, branches tearing at my face and arms. I could hear it behind me, that thing in the white dress, laughing like a child. The laughter echoed through the trees, multiplying, as if there were dozens of them laughing together. I burst back onto the road and kept running, not stopping until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally paused to catch my breath, the laughter had faded. But I knew they were still there, watching, waiting. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you to share this video with someone. If you have a friend who loves horror stories, if you know someone who is into creepy, unsolved mysteries, send them this link. These stories need to be heard, and the more people who know about what happened to me, the safer we all are. Because I genuinely believe these things are still out there, still hunting, and knowledge is the best defense we have. I continued hiking, now moving at a near jog, desperately wanting to put as much distance as possible between myself and that grove. The sun was past its peak, and I estimated it was around 3 p.m. I still had several hours of daylight left, but the forest seemed to be getting darker. The canopy overhead thicker, the temperature had dropped noticeably, and I could see my breath again. None of this made meteorological sense. The weather should not be changing this rapidly or drastically. Around 4 p.m., I came to a fork in the logging road. According to my map, I should take the left path, which would lead me to the staging area in about 3 more hours. But when I looked at the left path, I felt a wave of wrongness wash over me, a visceral sense of danger that made my skin prickle. The right path looked inviting by comparison, well lit and clear. But it was not on the map. It should not exist. I stood there for several minutes, debating what to do. Trust the map or trust my instincts? In the end, I chose the map. I knew that whatever was in this forest could manipulate perception, could make me see and feel things that were not real. The right path was probably a trap, a lure to get me even more lost. I took a deep breath, gripped my knife tightly, and started down the left path. The moment I stepped onto that path, the temperature plummeted. It went from chilly to freezing in seconds, and I could see frost forming on the trees around me. My breath came out in great billowing clouds, and my fingers started to go numb despite my gloves. This was not natural. This was not possible. But it was happening. I started walking faster, trying to generate body heat, but the cold seemed to seep into my bones, making every movement sluggish and difficult. And then I saw them. Figures standing in the trees on either side of the path. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all standing perfectly still, all watching me. They looked like the tree man I had seen earlier, tall and wrong, with those 2 long arms and 2 large heads. But these were different. Some had antlers growing from their skulls. Some had bark-like skin that made them blend with the trees. Some had faces that were just smooth, featureless flesh. They did not move as I passed. They just watched, silent and patient. I kept my eyes forward and kept walking. The warning I had found said not to acknowledge them, not to speak to them. So I did not. I pretended I did not see them, even though I could feel their eyes boring into me, even though every instinct screamed at me to run or fight or do something. I just walked, one foot in front of the other, focusing on the path ahead. The figures remained motionless, but I could sense their attention, their hunger. They wanted me to react. They wanted me to break. I did not break. I walked for what felt like hours, though my watch said it had only been 45 minutes. The figures eventually faded back into the trees, and the temperature slowly climbed back to normal. When I could no longer see any of them, I allowed myself to stop and rest against a tree, my whole body shaking from adrenaline and cold. I had survived another encounter. But how many more would there be? And how long could I keep this up? As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, I realized I was not going to make it to the staging area before dark. I was still at least 2 hours away, maybe more, and the light was fading fast. I needed to find shelter, somewhere defensible where I could wait out the night. The thought of spending another night in this forest filled me with dread, but I had no choice. I could not navigate these paths in complete darkness, not with those things out there. I left the main road and searched for a suitable location. After about 20 minutes, I found what I was looking for. A small cave, really more of an overhang, set into the side of a rocky hillside. It was not deep, maybe 15 feet, but it had a narrow entrance that I could defend if necessary. I gathered some fallen branches and created a makeshift barricade across the opening, leaving just enough space for me to squeeze through. Then I used my lighter to start a small fire near the entrance, remembering the note's advice to stay in the light. As darkness fell, I sat with my back against the cave wall, feeding the fire and trying not to think about what was out there in the darkness. The forest at night was a different world. The sounds were different, alien. I could hear things moving through the underbrush, heavy footsteps and rustling leaves. I could hear that whispering or chanting again, coming from multiple directions, growing louder and then fading away. And I could see eyes in the darkness beyond my fire, reflecting the orange light, watching me. At 8 p.m., something approached the cave entrance. I could not see what it was, but I could hear it breathing, deep, raspy breaths that sounded wrong, too wet and labored. It stopped just outside the barricade, and I heard it sniffing, like an animal catching a scent. The fire flickered, and for a moment, I saw a shape in the light, something massive and hunched, with skin that looked like it was made of tree bark and moss. It had no eyes that I could see, just dark holes where eyes should be. But I knew it was aware of me. "Logan," it whispered in a voice like grinding stones. Come out and play. We have been waiting so long, so hungry, so alone. I did not respond. I gripped my knife and stared into the fire, refusing to look at the creature. It stayed there for several more minutes, breathing and whispering my name, and then it moved away. I heard its footsteps fading into the distance, and I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. The fire burned low, and I added more wood, making sure to keep the flames high. The note had said to stay in the light, and I intended to follow that advice. Around 11 p.m., I heard the singing again. That same beautiful, haunting voice from earlier, now joined by others. It sounded like a choir, dozens of voices harmonizing in a language I did not understand. The song was hypnotic, pulling at something deep inside me, making me want to stand up and walk out into the darkness. I clenched my teeth and dug my fingernails into my palms, using the pain to keep myself anchored. Do not listen. Do not respond. Do not acknowledge. The singing continued for hours, rising and falling in waves, sometimes close and sometimes distant. At some point, I must have dozed off despite my fear, because I found myself jerking awake to find the fire had burned down to embers and the darkness had crept closer. I frantically added more wood and blew on the coals, bringing the flames back to life. As the light pushed back the shadows, I saw something that made my heart stop. There were handprints on the cave walls all around me, dozens of them, made from what looked like mud or sap or dried blood. They had not been there before. Something had come into the cave while I slept, had surrounded me, had left its mark. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, feeding the fire and watching the darkness. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound made me jump, but nothing else approached the cave. When dawn finally broke, I felt a surge of relief, so intense I nearly wept. I had survived another night. I was still alive. I extinguished the fire, dismantled my barricade, and continued down the logging road. My body ached, and I was running on adrenaline and fear, but I was close now. According to the map, the staging area was less than 2 hours away. I could make it. I had to make it. The morning was foggy, a thick white mist that reduced visibility to about 20 feet. It made everything look ghostly and unreal, and I had to move slowly to avoid tripping on roots or rocks hidden by the fog. As I walked, I noticed that the trees were changing. They looked more twisted, more diseased, their bark blackened and peeling. Some of them had that same wrong smell, like rot and decay. This part of the forest was dying, poisoned by whatever darkness lived here. Around 9 a.m., I heard an engine. It was faint but unmistakable, the rumble of a truck or heavy machinery. Hope surged in my chest. The staging area. I was close. I started moving faster, almost running, desperate to reach that sound, to see another human being, to get out of this nightmare. The fog began to clear as I ran, and I could see a break in the trees ahead, an opening that had to be the staging area. I burst into the clearing and stopped dead. The staging area was there, but it was wrong. The ground was covered in bones, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, scattered across the dirt like fallen leaves. Human bones, animal bones, all mixed together in a grotesque carpet of death. My truck was there, parked where I had left it, but it was covered in those same scratch marks I had seen on the trailer, deep gouges in the metal. And standing next to the truck was a figure I recognized. It was Bill, the site supervisor. "Bill!" I shouted, relief flooding through me. "Bill, thank God. We need to get out of here. This place is—" I stopped. Bill was not moving. He was just standing there, his back to me, perfectly still. I walked closer, my relief curdling into unease. "Bill?" I said quietly. "Are you okay?" He turned around, and I saw his face, or what was left of it. His eyes were gone, just empty sockets filled with darkness. His mouth was stretched into an impossible grin, showing far too many teeth. His skin had a grayish, waxy quality, like he had been dead for days. And when he spoke, it was with that same grinding stone voice I had heard the night before. "Hello, Logan," Bill said, or the thing wearing Bill's body said. "We have been waiting for you. You lasted longer than the others. But you cannot leave. No one leaves. This forest is ours. You are ours." I backed away slowly, my hand reaching for the knife at my belt. The bill thing took a step forward, and as it did, more figures emerged from the tree line. The tree man, the woman in the white dress, dozens of those twisted, wrong creatures, all converging on the clearing, all moving toward me. I was surrounded. There was nowhere to run, but I was not going to give up, not after everything I had survived. I pulled out the flare gun, aimed it at the sky, and fired. The flare shot up with a brilliant red light, arcing over the clearing and exploding in a burst of crimson sparks. It was a distress signal, a final desperate attempt to let someone, anyone, know I was here. And then I ran, not toward the truck, which was clearly compromised, but toward the far side of the clearing where I had seen a narrow trail leading deeper into the forest. The creatures howled and gave chase. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the underbrush, their voices raised in that terrible chorus of anger and hunger. I ran with everything I had, my lungs burning, my vision blurring with tears and exhaustion. The trail twisted and turned, taking me away from the staging area, away from the cleared logging roads, into the deepest part of the forest where the trees grew so thick that barely any light penetrated the canopy. I do not know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. All I knew was the desperate need to keep moving, to put distance between myself and those things. My legs felt like they were on fire, and every breath was agony. But I pushed forward. The sounds of pursuit gradually faded, and I realized I could no longer hear them behind me. Either I had outrun them, or they had stopped chasing me for some reason. I slowed to a walk, gasping for air, and looked around. I had no idea where I was. The trail had disappeared at some point, and I was now deep in virgin forest, surrounded by trees so old and massive they seemed like monuments from another age. There was something different about this part of the woods. The air felt cleaner, lighter. The oppressive darkness that had hung over the logging site was absent here. I pulled out my compass and checked my bearings, trying to figure out which direction would take me toward civilization. That was when I noticed the cabin. It was small and looked ancient, built from hand-hewn logs that had weathered to a silvery gray. Moss covered the roof, and vines crawled up the walls, but the structure appeared intact. Smoke was rising from a stone chimney. Someone was inside. I approached cautiously, my knife still in hand, unsure if I would find friend or foe. But at this point, I was willing to take the risk. I needed help. I needed answers. I knocked on the door. There was a long silence, and then I heard shuffling footsteps from inside. The door opened a crack, and an eye peered out at me, old and roomy but sharp with intelligence. The eye studied me for a moment. Then the door opened wider to reveal an elderly woman, probably in her 80s, with long white hair and weathered skin. She was dressed in simple clothes, a flannel shirt and work pants, and she held a shotgun in her gnarled hands. "You are from the logging company," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "My name is Logan. I was working at the Whisper Falls site. Something is wrong there. There are things in those woods, creatures that—" "I know what is in those woods," the old woman interrupted. "I have lived here for 63 years, and I have seen what they do to people like you. People who come in thinking they can take what they want, cut down what they want, without understanding what they are disturbing. Come inside. You look like you are about to collapse." I followed her into the cabin, which was surprisingly cozy and well-maintained. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, and the single room was filled with handmade furniture, shelves of books, and various tools and supplies. The woman gestured for me to sit at a rough wooden table, and she poured me a cup of coffee from a pot that had been sitting on the fire. I drank it gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through my body. "My name is Eleanor," the woman said, sitting across from me. "I was married to a logger once, back in the 60s. He worked this forest, same as you. He and his crew were hired by a company to clear-cut a section near what you call the Whisper Falls site. They did not know what they were getting into. None of them did." "What happened?" I asked. Eleanor took a sip of her own coffee, her eyes distant with memory. "They found something while they were clearing the land. An old growth. A grove of trees that were older than anything else in the forest. Maybe older than the forest itself. The trees were sacred to the native people who lived here centuries ago. They were guardians, Or so the stories say, keeping something locked away, something dark and hungry. My husband and his crew cut down those trees anyway. They had a job to do, and they did it. She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her cup. 3 days after they finished, the men started disappearing. One by one, they vanished in the night, or while they were working. The ones who remained started seeing things, hearing things. My husband told me about creatures that looked almost human but were not, about trees that moved when you were not looking, about voices that called your name in the dark. The company tried to cover it up, said it was accidents, said the men had just gotten lost or injured, but I knew better. I saw what my husband became before he disappeared. He was terrified, broken, and then one night, he walked into the forest and never came back. "Why did you stay?" I asked. "Why not leave?" "Because someone needs to remember," Eleanor said simply. "Someone needs to warn people like you. The company keeps sending loggers to that site, keeps offering money that is too good to refuse, keeps feeding people to whatever lives in those woods. I have tried to stop it, tried to report them to authorities, but no one believes an old woman living alone in the forest. They think I am crazy. Maybe I am, but I know what I have seen." I felt a chill run down my spine. What did they unleash when they cut down those sacred trees? Eleanor looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. The old people called them the Hollow Ones. Spirits or demons, I do not know which. They were imprisoned in the earth long ago, bound by the sacred grove. When the trees were destroyed, the binding weakened. The Hollow Ones could not fully escape, but they could reach out, could touch the world, could hunt, and they are always hungry. They feed on fear, on suffering, on life itself. Every person they take makes them stronger, brings them closer to full manifestation. If enough people die in those woods, if they feed enough, they will break free completely. And then, she trailed off, shaking her head. "How do I stop them?" I asked. "How do I get out of here alive?" "You cannot stop them," Eleanor said. "Not alone, but you can survive. The Hollow Ones are bound to the corrupted part of the forest, the area around the old logging site. If you can get beyond their territory, you will be safe. There is a river about 5 miles northeast of here, the Clearwater River. On the other side is clean land, untouched land. Cross that river, and they cannot follow." "Why not?" I asked. "What is special about the river?" "Running water is a barrier to such things," Eleanor explained. "It is an old magic, older than the Hollow Ones themselves. They cannot cross moving water. It disrupts whatever power sustains them. Get to that river, cross it, and you will be free. But you need to move fast. Night is coming again, and they will be searching for you. They know you are close to escaping, and they will not let you go easily." I stood up, feeling renewed determination. I had a goal now, a concrete destination, 5 miles northeast to the Clearwater River. I could do that. I had survived this long. I could survive a little longer. "Thank you," I said to Eleanor. "Thank you for telling me the truth. Thank you for trying to warn people." Eleanor nodded and stood as well. She walked to a shelf and pulled down a bundle wrapped in cloth. She handed it to me, and when I unwrapped it, I found it contained dried food, a water bottle, a compass, and a small pouch of what looked like salt mixed with herbs. "Take this," she said. "The food and water will sustain you, the compass will guide you, and the salt and herbs, sprinkle them in a circle around yourself if you need to rest. It will not stop the Hollow Ones, but it will slow them, confuse them. It might buy you enough time to escape." I tucked the bundle into my backpack and embraced the old woman briefly. "Will you be safe here?" I asked. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "I have been safe here for 63 years. They do not bother me anymore. I think they consider me part of the forest now, as much a fixture as the trees. Go now. You do not have much time." I left the cabin and used Eleanor's compass to orient myself northeast. The sun was already low on the horizon, and I estimated I had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. 5 miles in 2 hours was possible if I moved quickly and did not encounter any obstacles. I started walking at a brisk pace, pushing through the underbrush, following game trails when I found them, cutting directly through the forest when I did not. As I walked, I noticed the forest changing again. The trees here were healthier, more normal. I could hear birds singing, could see squirrels and chipmunks going about their business. The oppressive atmosphere was lifting, and I felt hope stirring in my chest for the first time in days. I was getting close. I was going to make it. But the hollow ones were not done with me yet. As the sun touched the horizon and the shadows lengthened, I heard movement in the trees around me. They were coming. I could not see them yet, but I could feel them, that same sense of being watched that I had experienced before. I quickened my pace, nearly jogging now, desperate to reach the river before full darkness fell. The sounds of pursuit grew louder. I could hear their footsteps, their breathing, their whispered chanting. They were converging on my position, coming from multiple directions, trying to cut off my escape. I abandoned all pretense of stealth and broke into a full run, crashing through the undergrowth, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. My backpack bounced painfully against my shoulders, and my lungs burned with effort, but I did not slow down. I could not slow down. I burst through a line of trees and found myself on the bank of a river. The Clearwater River. It was wider than I had expected, maybe 40 feet across, with fast-moving water that looked cold and deep. On the far side, I could see the forest continuing, but it looked different, cleaner, like a different world. Safety was just on the other side, but the river was a formidable obstacle. I was not a strong swimmer, and that water looked treacherous. Behind me, the hollow ones emerged from the tree line. There were at least 20 of them, maybe more. All the creatures I had seen over the past days, plus others I had not encountered yet. The tree man, the woman in the white dress, the bill thing, and others with forms so twisted and wrong that my mind struggled to process them. They arranged themselves in a semicircle around me, blocking any retreat, but they did not approach closer than about 30 feet. They were waiting at some invisible boundary, unable or unwilling to come nearer to the river. "Logan," the tree man said in that raspy, grinding voice, "you cannot leave. You belong to us now. We marked you. We claimed you. Cross that river, and you will drown. Stay here, and we will make your death quick. Choose." I looked at the river, then back at the creatures. They were lying. They had to be lying. Eleanor had told me the river was a barrier. They were trying to trick me, trying to make me give up. I would not give up. Not now. Not when I was so close. I pulled off my backpack and held it above my head with one hand, then waded into the river. The water was shockingly cold. So cold it felt like knives stabbing into my legs. The current was strong, trying to pull me downstream, and the rocky bottom was slippery and uneven. I took slow, careful steps, keeping my balance, moving toward the far shore. The hollow ones began to shriek and howl, a cacophony of rage and frustration that echoed through the forest. They surged forward to the river's edge, but stopped as if hitting an invisible wall. Unable to cross onto the water, I was halfway across when my foot slipped on a rock, and I went under. The current grabbed me immediately, pulling me downstream, tumbling me over and over. I lost my grip on my backpack and felt it torn away by the water. I fought to reach the surface, my lungs screaming for air, my heavy boots and clothes dragging me down. Just when I thought I was going to drown, my hand hit something solid, a rock or a log, I could not tell. But I grabbed onto it and pulled myself up, gasping and coughing. I had drifted about 50 feet downstream, but I was closer to the far shore now. I could touch the bottom again. I dragged myself forward, using the last reserves of my strength, pulling myself through the water inch by inch. My hands found mud and roots, and I hauled myself onto the bank, collapsing in the shallows, half in and half out of the water. I had made it. I was across. I lay there for several minutes, shivering violently, trying to catch my breath. When I finally had the strength to sit up and look back across the river, I saw the hollow ones still standing on the far shore. They were motionless now, silent, just watching me. The tree man raised one of his two long arms and pointed at me, and I could have sworn I saw something like respect or acknowledgement in that gesture. Then, one by one, they turned and melted back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows. I was safe, I was alive, and I was free. I spent that night on the riverbank, too exhausted to move any further. I managed to start a small fire using some dry wood I found nearby, and I huddled next to it, trying to warm my frozen body. I had lost my backpack, my supplies, everything, except the clothes on my back and the knife at my belt. But I was alive. That was what mattered. In the morning, I followed the river downstream. Eleanor had said that the Clearwater eventually connected to a larger river system that ran near the town of Millbrook, a small logging community about 20 miles from Whisper Falls. If I followed the water, I would eventually find people, find help. It took me 2 full days of walking, stopping only to rest and drink from the river, before I finally saw signs of civilization. A dirt road, then a house, then more houses, and finally, the town itself. I staggered into Millbrook looking like a madman, filthy and exhausted and wild-eyed. A local shopkeeper saw me and called the sheriff, thinking I was a vagrant or someone on drugs. When the sheriff arrived, I tried to explain what had happened, tried to tell him about the Hollow Ones, about Redwood acquisitions, about the bodies I had found. He listened with obvious skepticism, but he agreed to send a search and rescue team to the Whisper Falls site to investigate. 3 days later, the sheriff came to the motel where I was staying and told me what they had found. The staging area was empty except for my truck, which was heavily damaged but still there. They found the trailer at my base camp, also damaged, with the strange scratch marks I had described, and they found bones, a lot of bones, scattered throughout the logging site. Forensic analysis would take weeks, but preliminary counts suggested at least 15 different individuals. The sheriff looked at me with new respect, or maybe fear, and said they were opening a criminal investigation into Redwood acquisitions. I gave them everything I knew. I told them about Bill, about the bodies I had found, about the warning note. I did not tell them about the Hollow Ones or Eleanor or the specifics of what I had encountered. I knew they would not believe me, would think I had suffered some kind of psychological break. Instead, I focused on the facts they could verify. The company had sent multiple loggers to a dangerous site. Those loggers had disappeared, and Redwood acquisitions had covered it up. The investigation moved quickly once law enforcement and federal agencies got involved. It turned out Redwood Acquisitions was a shell company with ties to several other corporations, all designed to obfuscate responsibility and avoid liability. Bill, the site supervisor, was eventually found in a motel room 3 states away, suffering from what doctors described as a complete psychotic break. He could not or would not explain what had happened, just kept repeating the phrase, "They are still hungry," over and over. The Whisper Falls site was declared off-limits and is now under federal protection as part of an expanded wilderness preserve. Official reports cite environmental concerns and unstable terrain as the reasons for the closure. No logging will ever happen there again. At least, that is the official story. I know the truth. I know what is really in those woods, waiting, hunting, feeding. As for me, I never worked as a logger again. I could not bring myself to set foot in a forest after what I experienced. I moved to a city, got a job doing construction work, and tried to rebuild my life. I still have nightmares about the Hollow Ones, about the tree man and the woman in the white dress, about Bill's empty eyes and too wide grin. I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, convinced I can hear them scratching at my door, whispering my name. I went back to see Eleanor once, about 6 months after I escaped. I wanted to thank her again, to let her know that the site had been closed, that no more loggers would be sent to feed the Hollow Ones. But when I found her cabin, it was empty and had clearly been abandoned for years. The roof had caved in, the windows were broken, and vines had completely overtaken the structure. There was no sign that anyone had lived there in decades. I do not know if Eleanor was real or if she was something else. Some guardian spirit of the forest who helped me because I was one of the few people who had listened to the warnings. I will probably never know. What I do know is this: there are places in this world where darkness lives, where ancient things sleep, or wait, or hunt. The forests, the deep woods, the places humanity has not yet conquered. They hold secrets and dangers we cannot fully understand. And sometimes, in our arrogance and greed, we disturb things that should be left alone. We cut down the sacred groves. We destroy the boundaries that keep evil contained. And when we do, people like me pay the price. 15 people died at the Whisper Falls site before me. 15 people who were just trying to make a living, just trying to support their families, just trying to get by. They were sacrificed by a company that knew what was there, that had been using that site as a dumping ground for expendable workers for decades. Some of them probably escaped like I did, got across the river, made it to safety. But most of them did not. Most of them are still out there, their bones scattered among the twisted trees, their spirits trapped in that dark place. I am sharing this story now because I want people to know the truth. I want people to understand that there are monsters in this world, and they are not always the ones you expect. Sometimes the monster is the corporation that values profit over human life. Sometimes the monster is the thing that lurks in the shadows between the trees. And sometimes, the scariest monster is the one inside ourselves, the voice that tells us to ignore the warnings, to take the risk, to believe that nothing bad will happen to us. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. Listen to the warnings. Pay attention to your instincts. If something feels wrong, if every fiber of your being is telling you to walk away, then walk away. The money is not worth your life. The job is not worth your sanity. And no matter what anyone tells you, there are some places in this world where humans do not belong. I survived the Whisper Falls site, but I am one of the lucky ones. I got out. I escaped. But part of me is still there. Still running through those dark woods. Still hearing the hollow ones calling my name. And sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet and I am alone with my thoughts, I wonder if I really did escape, or if I am still there, trapped in that forest, living out a pleasant dream while the hollow ones feast on what remains. I am Logan. I am 27 years old, and I am a logger who survived something that should not exist. This is my story. This is my warning, and if you ever find yourself in a situation like mine, if you ever encounter something that defies explanation, if you ever have to choose between staying and running, I want you to remember what I learned. Run. Run as fast as you can. Run until your lungs burn and your legs give out. Run until you cross the river and leave the darkness behind. Because the only thing scarier than facing a monster is becoming prey to one. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found it valuable, if it made you think, if it gave you chills, please hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, stay safe out there. The world is full of wonders, but it is also full of dangers. Respect the wild places, respect the old places, and never, ever ignore the warnings. I still think about Eleanor sometimes, whoever or whatever she really was. I think about the warning note I found in the trailer, written by someone who had been at that site decades before me. I think about all the people who tried to warn others, tried to save lives, only to be ignored or dismissed as crazy. I am not going to let their efforts be in vain. I am telling you now, plainly and clearly, there are monsters in the Whisper Falls forest. They are still there. They are still hungry. And they are still waiting for the next person foolish enough to wander into their territory. Do not be that person. Do not take the job that is too good to be true. Do not ignore the feeling of dread when you step into a place that feels wrong. Do not believe the company that tells you everything is fine when your gut says otherwise. Trust yourself, trust your instincts, and survive. This is Logan, signing off. Stay safe, stay smart, and remember, some trees are meant to stand forever,